Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Latifa Farah, Associate Creative Producer at Venture for Canada and the producer of a new wave of entrepreneurship. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneur mindset and skills. We'll be chatting with CEOs, founders, and successful business leaders about their career journeys. We're excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive.
We are extremely excited to have Martin Picard on the Venture for Canada podcast this morning. Martin, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Scott.
My first topic that I really like to talk about with you, Martin, is in what ways do you think the COVID-19 pandemic altered the state of the travel and hospitality industry for the long term?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's been a lot of learnings over the last few years. Our sector has definitely been hit pretty hard, and the sort of the resiliency of our business model has been put to the test. So, some of the things that we noticed over the last couple of years, one is we've really seen completely new use cases pop up. One of the things that allowed us to really navigate the pandemic so well has been this shift to longer stays. So tapping into, for instance, this idea of the digital nomad, right? People that are going from one city to the next, staying there for much longer periods of time, that really enjoy the convenience of having an apartment as opposed to a standard hotel room. And we've seen that trend continue even today. I think the other aspect that we've seen is a lot more desire for a contactless experience. The fact that you can use the app to navigate through the property, your experience, as opposed to having to stand in the lobby and have to deal with a lot of other hotel or interactions with guests. So we've seen that. I think those are really probably the two main changes that we've seen happen in the hotel sector.
And to your first change, I definitely relate to it on a personal level. During the pandemic, I spent a month renting a house in Costa Rica where I had different friends and my partner where we kind of co-worked from this house for a month. And it was such a phenomenal experience. I was like, okay, in this era of remote work, I definitely want to keep this up. And I feel like I'm probably far from the only person. I've definitely seen a lot of TikTok videos where it's just like, bliss is like renting a house in like rural Italy and like working with a bunch of friends there for a month. It's also interesting. What we did is we spent like around 2 weeks in Costa Rica on vacation, and then we basically worked remotely for 2 weeks. Like we extended, and it'll be interesting the extent to which people do this like kind of vacation / working remotely fusion potentially in the future, where you like tack on working remotely in the trip. One question I have, and something I found as a consumer has been sometimes challenging, is renting houses or apartments that are suitable for remote work. So in essence, like places that there's lots of places that are vacation homes, but they're not necessarily great for like, okay, I want like an actual office. Do you think that there's going to be in the future more kind of vacation properties, more rentals that are purpose designed for remote workers?
I would imagine, and the data point that I would use to support that is, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of guests that were staying with us, and then one of the number one request for a while wasn't towels; it was, can we set up another desk in the apartment? Is there a way to do that? Because a lot of people were staying for a month, and we were seeing a lot of people that were extending their stay as well. So people that are just so comfortable in going and living in Phoenix, say for a few weeks and deciding to stay. So people need a better work setup. They need so I would imagine that it'll be the same thing for these different villas and houses down in these more vacation destinations.
Yeah, there becomes ergonomic challenges working for an extended period of time. Working from a bed is okay for like a day or two, but after 2 weeks of being like working from paradise becomes not very nice for one's back. So kind of zooming in a little bit on your work, Martin, can you describe Sonder, and in particular, can you describe how the Sonder guest experience differs from a traditional guest experience?
Right. I mean, look, we're building the next generation of hospitality. where we offer a tech-enabled experience where you've got a beautifully designed space. And today we do that in 35 cities, in 10 different countries. And really the difference between a more traditional experience is how we leverage technology. So we're really a mobile first company. So you use your phone throughout the entire experience. So from when you book on the Sonder app, you do your check-in through the Sonder app. So there's facial recognition with a piece of ID that provides for you the codes to get into the building. You use your phone to access the front door. You use your phone to get into the unit. And when you want to interact with our concierge service, again, you're going through the app. If you want an early check-in or a late checkout, there's no calling anyone or emailing anyone. It's all done through the app. You just hit a button. We leverage technology and sort of the infrastructure that's been built over the last decade when it comes to on-demand food services, car services. So there isn't someone that will whistle a cab for you. We think that you're able to do that pretty well on your phone. The same thing for ordering food. We won't necessarily have food and beverage on site that could come up to your room, but we've got partnerships and we can have a curated menu by tapping into the existing infrastructure. So we do all of that. We think it provides a completely different experience that resonates with people, with some of the younger generations, but frankly, even with some of the more established folks. I mean, the average age has gone up tremendously. The average person that stays with us is in their early 40s. So it's not just something that we've built for the Gen Z.
So I can imagine all these kind of technological efficiencies and kind of in essence like cutting the fat out of a lot of like hotel operations can save a lot in terms of kind of like the bottom line. To your point, like a lot of big traditional hotels, they'll have just a lot of headcount. They'll have people at front desks. They'll have people waving down taxis. To what extent, like in terms of kind of like an operating like margin, like if you're cutting out in essence all that fat, all the sort of the unnecessary like bells and whistles, how much can a typical kind of like hotel kind of or hospitality kind of operation save in the course of a year in terms of like a percent of their operating expenditures?
It really depends. It'll be asset by asset, but I think for the most part, from an operating efficiency standpoint, from a cost standpoint, we're able to cut the operating costs almost in half. And that allows us to do a few things, right? One is offer a very competitive price point to the guest, generate interesting returns for the owners on the real estate side, and for us, generate an interesting profit. Some of that value that we create goes back to the guest in the form of additional space. You're getting a space that is at least twice as big as a standard hotel room. You're getting a kitchen, you're getting a living room, you're getting a lot of space, and you're getting that at a super attractive price point.
It's amazing. That is a lot higher percent than I was thinking in my head, like 15, 20%. 50% gives an idea of just how much is going to like all of those different kind of pieces. So one of the things I'm kind of thinking about is what does like the hotel room of like 2035 look like? Like what is like the future of the hotel space? And I think about like a typical hotel room today in like 2022 is not that different than what it was maybe like 25, 30 years ago. Maybe there's like a little USB thing where I can like plug in my phone. Maybe there's still a lot of hotels where that's not the case. Maybe there's like a nicer TV, but the actual fundamentals of a hotel room aren't that different today, I find, than they were 30 years, at least at traditional kind of hotel kind of operators. So my question to you is, what does the hotel room of 2035 look like? What does the guest experience of 2035 look like?
When you think about why people travel, there are so many different use cases. You could be traveling to a city for a night, for a business meeting. It could be a weekend getaway with your partner. It could be a traveling family. There are so many different use cases, but there's one product. And that's a hotel room that doesn't have a kitchen, doesn't really have a living room. From a big brand perspective, those hotel rooms look exactly the same in every market. Like if you're waking up in Phoenix or you're waking up in New York, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference by just looking at the room in the morning. our vision is not that standard hotel rooms will go away, but that sort of the portfolio that will get built out will be very different so that you can find the right product for the right use case. So if it is a one-night business trip, maybe you need a very efficient hotel room and that's what suits you best. And if you're staying with a family, maybe a 2-bedroom apartment is what works best. So I actually think where we're going to go is having buildings that have, instead of just being purely hotel rooms, you'll have a building that is a mix of different types of units. Some of them will be standard hotel rooms. Some of them will have multi-bedrooms. And I think it will be a lot less about trying to pack into that building all of the services in one spot, and it'll be about connecting that asset with the rest of the neighborhood that it sits in and leveraging, what it has to offer.
One interview about Sonder, there's a line that someone says, consistency can be soul crushing. And I think that that's something that I really relate to, because, and I think of the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney that came up I think 15 years ago, where in essence, his job is to go around the United States and fire people. And in many ways, the film is kind of a critique of the soullessness of modern travel, or at least modern business travel, because every hotel room is the exact same. I remember he uses the term foamy, fake homey. And that's what basically you wake up in Phoenix, you wake up in Las Vegas, you wake up in Seattle. It's the same sort of hotel room experience. And I think in particular, younger people, Gen Z, millennials, are looking for more authenticity kind of in their travel experiences. So what are, I guess, more tangibly, Martin, what are some of the ways that a hotel can try to personalize, to sort of show that personality in a way that it's not just a hotel that could be literally in any city in the world?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which you can do it. Let's say, for example, when it comes to the design, I think if our approach at least has been, are there local artists that we can partner up with? So, the artwork that is in the units feels, or at least was done by someone that, lives in Philadelphia, and sort of you can get that sense in the property. It may be in, small details, like how do you think about your coffee program? Are you going to put Starbucks coffee in there, or are you going to go with kind of the local coffee roasters? And I think that's where over standardizing, leads to kind of just not the most inspiring experience. So you really have to be a business that wants to get into those details and take on a little bit more operational complexity. That's true. But we think that there's a huge boost when it comes to the guest experience.
So Sonder started in 2012, and it was founded in Montreal. And I actually remember when I was first starting to do Venture for Canada, visiting, and I met somebody who was an early employee named, I think it was Carlos Marin. I'm not sure if you remember Carlos
absolutely.
from years ago. So I think this is probably 2016. And I think it was around that time where what was then Flatbook, what is now Sonder, relocated from Montreal to San Francisco. And since then, there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of change in the Canadian kind of tech sector. So Martin, my question to you is, if Sonder was founded, let's say 5-10 years later than it was, do you think that you and your co-founders would have still made the decision to relocate the company from Montreal to San Francisco?
It's hard to say, especially in a sort of post-COVID kind of world where everything is remote. Definitely, definitely wouldn't have been as clear-cut of a decision today than it was back then. I think our main issue at the time was, 6 or 7 years ago, the investment, the VC infrastructure, the ecosystem in Canada wasn't what it is today. I mean, there weren't as many unicorns. It was pretty hard. If you had to raise $20 million, it was very challenging to do so. And, we knew right from the get-go that our our ambition was to be a global company. We knew that we were going to need a lot of capital along the way, and a lot of our advisors suggested that we make the move to San Francisco to be closer to the investment community. In many ways, that has paid off. It's been a good decision for us. Today, I look at some of the companies that are some of the Canadian companies and the rounds that they're able to do from Canada and often with Canadian investors, leads me to believe that there definitely would have been a good chance that we would have been able to do that from Montreal and wouldn't have had to relocate the company. But today we're kind of back in Montreal, I guess I'd say, in a way. We're opening. We've opened a big office here. We'll have hundreds of employees here in Montreal. A lot of those roles are going to be global roles where people are going to be making decisions all over the world based in Montreal.
Out of interest, why did you make this or the more recent decision to kind of reinvest in Montreal, to kind of like in many ways like you made the decision 5 or 6 years ago to move your HQ to San Francisco, and then more recently to kind of in many ways not shift your headquarters but shift to focus kind of back to Canada? What made Montreal and kind of making that refocus back on Canada so appealing?
We tried to actually run an objective search. So we knew that we wanted to open a second office to be able to tap into different talent pools. We ran some research and looked at top cities, both in Canada and other locations in the US. From a talent pool perspective, Montreal had something unique to offer. And we also had, a bit of a name that we had built in Montreal. People were familiar with the business, and we thought that this was a good spot to open up an office and kind of leverage a bit of that. And I think the provincial government did a really good job of kind of working through that with us and making sure that we felt like we had their support to set up the office. So, Montreal's got a ton of, great universities. We've got some really good talent that we can tap into. Other businesses have done so, right? I think Shopify's got a big office in Montreal. We're happy about the decision. We're excited about it. We've got, a few hundred employees here, and hopefully we can keep growing that.
So you've built this, huge global company. Out of interest, how many units do you currently operate around the world as of February 2022?
Right now, we've got a little over 7,000, almost 8,000 units. We've got a book, another almost about twice that amount in terms of properties that are signed and under construction and going to open over the next few years.
How have you scaled kind of your human resources operations kind of over time? I can imagine, you've gone from, I remember back in 2015, 2016, you were probably like 50, 100 kind of employees, and now you're how in 1,000 or more?
Yeah, today we have about 1,800 employees.
Wow.
Globally.
How have you kind of scaled your culture over time, particularly in the fact that you're running these, hospitality, like in essence, hotels, like all around the world? You have a global kind of like workforce. You have, two main offices in Montreal and San Francisco. And one thing I've found on this podcast and interviewing lots of entrepreneurs who built, big successful global companies, something that often comes up is one of the biggest challenges is just how do you rapidly scale culture? How do you build a team? How do you maintain quality of employees when you're hiring people kind of that quickly? So to crystallize the question into one sort of specific thing is, what's one tip that, Martin, that you would give a founder on how to scale human resources when you go through a period of or periods of rapid growth?
I think you have to feel rock solid that the core values that you have are really the right ones, because things are going to get tough. When you're scaling that fast, there's going to be highs and lows. I think having a set of core values that you can point to in terms of just how you're making decisions, and people feel like they know because of those core values how the business is run, how decisions are made, how they need to act, how their performance will be evaluated. I think you need to have the right core values and really stick to them. from a scaling perspective, it's very tempting to kind of lower the bar or hire someone that isn't maybe the perfect culture fit, but your team is just, it's just so overworked that you just feel like you need to bring on board some new folks. It's really important to keep the bar high, especially when it comes to culture. And even if it means taking a bit more time to find the right person, because if you don't, it can be more damaging than anything. So just like keeping the bar high on culture, and that doesn't mean just the founders or whatnot. I mean, there are people throughout the company. Either they've been on the founding, what we consider to be the founding team, but even more than that, there are people in the company that are culture carriers, that are just great ambassadors. And especially for us in a very distributed business where we've got people in 35 different cities, we need to feel like we've got those folks everywhere, and they know they know what good looks like at Sonder and who's a right fit. And we need to lean on those folks a lot to make hiring decisions, to make business decisions.
Yeah, it's something that has come up a bunch on this podcast. Is people have talked about the phenomenon of, if you hire B players, then they end up hiring C players, and you go into this kind of death spiral where eventually the culture ends up becoming so. But it is very tempting at various points to just be like, hey, we need somebody. People are working 12-hour days. Let's make a compromise.
Yeah, and I mean, people will think
so.
Hey, I've heard, it's like, we have we're a thousand people organization. We won't be able to just hire 8 people. Like at some point we're going to have to let in some B people. And I think you don't want to go down that path. You want to keep the bar high. There are tons of great people out there. It just takes sometimes a little bit more time to find them.
What are the core values of Sonder?
Yeah, they've actually changed a little bit over the years, but some of the ones that just a few important ones, so, obligation to speak up is one. Like, we want feedback from, if you see anything in the company that doesn't seem right to you, we want to make it feel like you have an obligation to say something, so if you disagree with the decision, if you have a different perspective on it, it doesn't matter if you're where you sit in terms of seniority in the org. We want to make sure that everybody feels like they have the obligation to speak up if something's not right. Resilience is something that's really critical for us. Resilience and how to deal with adversity and being resourceful. And I mean, that was something that we leaned on a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, is the fact that that's something that we value. Think rigorously. Like, we're an operator at the end of the day. There's a lot of metrics. There's a lot of just operational efficiency that we need to go for. So think rigorously. Act like an owner. We want everybody in the company has got a stake. Everybody's got some equity. How do we all make decisions? And yes, you've got your own personal objectives and you've got your team objectives, but how do you make sure that on top of that, you're making decisions that are the best decisions for the company? So act like an owner is one that we really try to reinforce with people.
One thing I found interesting was you said that they've evolved over time. So kind of related to this point, what are some values that you dropped or potentially removed, and why did you remove them?
Well, for example, in the kind of the early days, I guess I'll say, one of them was freedom. It actually just wasn't clear what it meant, so it kind of evolved over time. And I think it's more of a situation where we some of it as we saw we saw sort of different cracks. I think the business also evolved in many ways where we just, we didn't feel like they fit as well. So I think we've changed them 3 times over the last 8 years. And every time we do, we walk people through why we did it. And it's like, it's a big thing. And we use them to evaluate performance in every cycle that we do, performance cycles for the team. Any type of celebration at the company for folks that are doing outstanding work is around values. Every week we have someone that is nominated by their peers for different values that they really embody. So it's you can get a lot out of you can get a lot of value in running the business with the right set of core values. It makes it much easier, I think.
And it's important to reevaluate. The reason I asked this question is I feel there's many guests on this podcast that have talked about the importance of core values in a company, but it's never come up about the importance of revisiting them. And I think some people view them as like kind of like a 10 commandments, like these are the values and we will always kind of follow them. And it's a recognition that no, sometimes at different points you need different values, or it makes sense to reevaluate. I'm partly interested in this because at Venture for Canada, we recently updated our values. We were only 35, employees, much smaller, but we had like 10 or 11 values, and then we were like, hey, this is too many. We're bringing it down to 4, and the goal is that those 4 people really remember, because otherwise, when you just have 11, people are just a lot of times kind of forgetting them. One thing that comes on the topic kind of values, as I was thinking about it, is your company recently went public via a SPAC, which is for our listeners, if you don't know what that means, it's a special purpose acquisition company, and your company is now public. And one thing that is frequently brought up is when a company goes public, there's a whole new level of pressures, and there can sometimes be more pressure on short-term results, that the stock market is kind of constantly looking at on a quarterly basis how you're performing. Some people can get addicted to looking at the stock price every single day and seeing, and where we're at right now as well is it's been a challenging time in the stock market in general, but for tech companies kind of across the board. How do you as a company, when you make this huge transition from going from being a private company to a public company, ensure that you're still focused on kind of long-term results, your long-term goal of transforming kind of the global hospitality industry, rather than getting sort of sucked into the game of focusing a lot on public markets and sort of short-term thinking and results?
I mean, I think a lot of it for us has to do with we decided to go through this SPAC process to take the company public. And the idea there was we have a growth plan that we want to execute on. The IPO is not the final destination. That's something that we've talked a lot about internally with our teams. We've got we went public at a 2 billion market cap. Companies like Marriott have, a 50, 60, 80 billion dollar market cap. There is a lot of room for us to grow. This is very much like the early innings for us. And we're raising money to be able to execute on that vision. And so I think some level of alignment, with our SPAC sponsor was important, with our investors, and the messaging to the market. There's a huge opportunity ahead of us. Now that doesn't mean that we don't need to adapt some of our more tactical decisions to what's going on in the market, and we need to be nimble. But I think the vision hasn't changed, and I think that's something that we just reinforce a lot internally. We talk about the idea of not being a stock watcher. There's the thought can go up and down, and really there's no new information out there that gets circulated about the company. So the movement has nothing to do with something that we're doing right or wrong in many cases. So we don't control those things. We're just focused on the long-term growth, the opportunity ahead of us. And in that context here, the capital that we've raised allows us to execute on that. So I think that's what people internally are excited about, and I'm sure externally what folks are looking forward to.
In general, kind of in beyond Sonder, like was a couple of weeks ago, Meta lost 30% of its market value. I think it was the largest amount of market value lost by a company in history in one day. And it's been a challenging time in general, for companies. And one of the things I've thought about, I've been frequently thinking about Lightspeed, for instance, which is based in Montreal. It's lost like 80%, of its market value since like October, a huge amount in terms of public markets. But at the same time, they're a company that has an ambitious goal. but I think of try to put myself in the perspective of a CEO of a company when you lose that much kind of market value from the public markets, even if it's not necessarily rational, and how to maintain positive morale in terms of employees and different things. So not Lightspeed specific, but just in general, if a company is getting sort of wrecked in the public markets, and it's because of sort of just a broader stock market kind of like adjustment, what advice do you have for leaders of kind of executive teams on how to still maintain that morale, recognizing that people do follow the news, that when there is a fall, it can be a little sort of demoralizing. How do you keep that morale up in the face of a potential kind of downturn, more broadly speaking, in terms of public markets?
Good question. I think it boils down to, like, what do you control, and focusing on the fundamentals and what you control as opposed to what you don't control. I think internally you're hiring smart people. They're engaged on the vision and on the product that you're building. Nothing has changed there. And I think in some cases, overreacting or overcorrecting is probably going to create more panic in the business than kind of just reinforcing the message that we need to focus on the long-term vision, the fundamentals of the business, on what we control, as opposed to just kind of being in a state of reaction to what's going on in the market. But I mean, I'm sure it's not an easy pitch. Not an easy pitch to do, for sure. But people, I think, ultimately in today's job market have so many options that if they decide to work with you, they really believe in the long-term vision of the business, and that's what they want to be a part of. So I think they won't be too impacted by day-to-day stock swings. I mean, it may surprise them, but it would be a lot more alarming if you changed your vision and your whole strategy every time the stock went up or down.
And that the stock public markets and the stock market in general is not necessarily like rational. Like I think that's the thing, is that, to your point, and I never heard that before, but it's something that will stick with me for a while, is that really the only thing, on a purely logical basis, the main thing that would impact stock prices is the announcement of like quarterly results. But there can be such huge variations, not even in the time period where it's even surrounding kind of quarterly earnings. Recognizing the fact that there's so much that, like, you as a CEO, you as a management team just can't control. Like, the stock price is impacted by macroeconomic factors, by how other companies are doing. And I like that advice of, like, focus on the things you can control, focus on the long-term vision, and don't get distracted by the short-term, every day how the stock is. But I can imagine when someone's in these kind of companies, or an employee, and they own a lot of stock in the company, it can be very enticing to be wanted. Oh, good. I'm just going to Google and check in to see how the stock's doing right now. And it's kind of, it's like breaking that impulse to be like, no, we're saying I will check it like once every 2 weeks, and that's it. Martin, it's been a pleasure. It's been a very interesting interview. I knew very little about the hospitality industry before researching and kind of doing this interview. I think it's really interesting what your company is doing. I think Sonder has the potential to be, like, in the future, a major player that's competing against these big hotel brands, and it'd be very interesting to see what, like, the future of the hotel experience looks like in 10 years. And my hypothesis is it's going to look probably a lot more like what you're doing kind of today, and probably even more tech enabled, because I'm sure it's just there's constant room for efficiencies. Constant room to make the experience better and more modern, and ultimately more efficient. And it's also been interesting learning more about how you scaled the company, how you built it, and your sort of transition to now being publicly traded. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. It was a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Scott. Really enjoyed talking to you. Appreciate it.
That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stewart, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided stated by our guests and our host is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.